DeepSeek just started building its own AI chip, not to beat Nvidia, not even to beat Huawei, to stop needing either one. Here's what that actually means for two companies that just found out on the same day that their biggest Chinese customer wants a way out. On July 7th, Reuters reported that the Hangzhou-based AI lab is quietly designing a semiconductor built for inference. That's the stage where a trained model actually answers your question, not the stage where it learns in the first place. Within hours, Nvidia shares slipped in pre-market trading, and the news spread through market coverage on CNBC, Yahoo Finance, and investing.com within the same morning. That reaction alone tells you how seriously the market took it, even before a single technical detail about the chip itself had been confirmed. To understand why a company known for AI models, not hardware, building a chip is even news, you need a few minutes on why inference has become the real battlefield in this industry. Training a model happens once. You spend months and enormous sums of money on it, and then it's done. Inference happens every single time someone actually uses that model forever, for as long as the product exists. Every chat reply, every generated image, every line of code an assistant writes. That workload never stops, and it scales with users, not with research budgets. Whoever controls the chips that run inference controls the real, ongoing cost of AI. Think of training like building a factory once. Inference is running that factory every day for the rest of its life. The building cost is fixed. The running cost never ends. That's the only comparison you'll get from me today, since this audience already knows the difference between a GPU and a foundry. DeepSeek has relied on Nvidia's H800 and H100 class chips for training and on Huawei's Ascend accelerators for part of its inference workload. Both paths come with a catch. Nvidia's most advanced hardware remains restricted from Chinese buyers under export controls, tightened repeatedly since October 2022, and even the H200 approval issued in January 2026 came with a 50% volume cap and mandatory third-party testing before any chip could ship. Huawei's Ascend line works, but DeepSeek has reportedly run into unstable performance and slower chip-to-chip connectivity on it, according to reporting from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, along with limitations tied to Huawei's own CNN software toolkit. Neither supplier is fully DeepSeek's to control, and that's exactly the gap this project is aimed at closing. Owning your own chip means owning your own roadmap, instead of waiting on Washington's licensing decisions or Huawei's engineering timeline. So what actually happened, and what can we verify? According to Reuters, citing 3 people familiar with the project, DeepSeek has been working on this chip for roughly a year. The company has quietly expanded its chip design engineering team without posting public job listings, and it's in active discussions with outside chip design firms, foundries, and memory suppliers. No foundry partner has been named publicly, no architecture has been disclosed. By DeepSeek's own silence and by Reuters' own framing, this is still an early-stage project, not a finished design. Here's the part that turns this from a single unnamed source story into something we can actually corroborate. Back in August 2025, DeepSeek released its V3.1 model with a short technical note on its official WeChat account. The company said the model used something called the UE8M0 FP8 data format, built to be compatible with, in DeepSeek's own words, homegrown chips soon to be released. South China Morning Post confirmed that statement independently at the time. That's an 11-month-old breadcrumb, and it lines up precisely with what Reuters just reported this week. Two sources 11 months apart describing the same project from two completely different directions. What the reporting doesn't resolve is which foundry would actually manufacture this chip. SMIC is the most plausible candidate since it's currently the only Chinese foundry capable of producing logic at the node this project would likely require, but that connection has not been confirmed by any source, and treating it as fact rather than an informed guess would be exactly the kind of unverified claim we don't publish here. The same goes for memory. Reuters mentioned discussions with memory suppliers but named none, and given how constrained domestic high-bandwidth memory production still is in China, that detail alone could end up being the real bottleneck on this entire project. This remains a laboratory stage project. There is no working silicon, no announced tape-out date, and no confirmed performance target. If DeepSeek's chip becomes a real shipping product, that's most likely still years away. For comparison, chip design efforts of this kind typically move from first hires to a working prototype in 18 months to 3 years, and from prototype to a shipping product in another year or two. On top of that, even for a well-funded team with a clear target. The companies that should be paying attention already are. Nvidia's stock reaction was immediate but measured, sliding roughly 1.5% to 2% on the day and closing down around 2% by the end of the session, according to trading data cited by Benzinga and Investing.com. Several analysts described that as a proportionate response, given that Nvidia's China data center revenue had already collapsed from over $4 billion a year to close to zero under existing restrictions before this story even broke. One equity research note framed it plainly, calling the chip project a long-term risk to watch rather than an immediate threat, since it mainly touches a China business that had already shrunk to almost nothing. Bloomberg noted that DeepSeek is joining a growing list of AI labs building their own silicon alongside OpenAI, which unveiled its jalapeno inference chip built with Broadcom last month, and Anthropic, which Reuters reported in April had been weighing the same move. This isn't a uniquely Chinese story. It's a pattern spreading across the entire AI industry, and DeepSeek just became the most symbolic name added to that list this week. Now here's what this actually means for you. On pricing, nothing changes in the near term. This chip doesn't exist yet in any deployable form, so there's no product to price and no discount arriving on any graphics processing unit cloud bill because of it. What it signals is longer-term pressure on inference costs specifically, since custom inference silicon tends to run cheaper per query than general-purpose graphics processing units once it actually ships at scale. That matters most for the API prices developers pay to run DeepSeek's models, not for anything a consumer buys directly off a shelf. On availability, if DeepSeek follows the pattern of comparable projects, expect years rather than months between a report like this one and an actual shipping chip. OpenAI's Jalapeno took roughly 2 years from the first reports of its existence to launch. There is no strong reason to expect DeepSeek to move faster, especially while it's still sourcing a foundry partner under active export restrictions. On the investment side, Nvidia's China exposure was already close to fully priced out before this story broke, which is part of why the stock move was small rather than dramatic. What this changes is the longer horizon, not next quarter's earnings call. Every AI lab that successfully builds its own silicon becomes one less customer for merchant chip vendors globally, and that applies to Huawei as much as it applies to Nvidia. DeepSeek's own funding round, reportedly valuing the company between $52 and $59 billion, gives it the balance sheet to actually fund years of chip development rather than abandon the project the moment it gets expensive. Here's my honest read on what this actually changes and what it doesn't. This story isn't really about whether DeepSeek can out-engineer Nvidia. It almost certainly can't, not in the near term, and building genuinely competitive silicon takes far more than talented AI researchers and a hiring spree. What it tells you is that even the most efficient AI lab in the world, one that famously trained frontier models on a fraction of the usual GPU budget, still considers chip independence worth a multi-year investment. That's not a threat assessment about Nvidia's quarterly numbers. It's a signal about where the entire industry believes the next decade is heading. So here's my question for you. If every major AI lab eventually designs its own chips, Nvidia included in parts of its own business, does that make the merchant GPU market smaller and less relevant over time? Or does total demand simply keep growing faster than any single lab could ever build for itself? Drop your honest take below and say which side of that bet you'd actually put money on. Silicon Brief covers the chip race with named sources and a clear line between what is confirmed and what still is not. Subscribe if that is useful to you.